is Carol Cieszinski, and I'm here to talk to you all about how genealogy can help people not only know where they came from, but also it'll help county history, city histories, and just so much you can learn because of genealogists that do that. Okay, here in front of me, I have the communication letters from hundreds of people I communicate with, and I've always been a person that people need to talk and they need to talk to somebody, and I like to do that. Okay, well, I'm going to talk about the picture I put there in front of you. That happens to be my father, and notice the pants he's wearing. He's a little child, and they're all covered up, rolled up. And that's because in those days, people were poor, and they had to grow into those overalls. So that's how it was, in the early days. But we start to learn stuff by what genealogists record. And so here I have a lot of things, and I won't go with all of them, but in this one particular letter, the lady asked, she says, there was a phone book cover from the San Antonio phone book, and they made prints out of them, and I really would like to have a copy of that. Well, very few people know this. This is the print of that phone book cover, San Antonio. Wow. And the reason is Navarro's on there. Navarro is right, where is he? Right here. And so everybody knows what a phone book looks like, so it wasn't very big, but these are the prints. And I had framed only 2 of them, expensive, and so therefore I only did one for myself and one for my mom. Where my mother's is, I don't know. But it was interesting that people care and would have liked to have had that. And then the last little thing I'll touch on is this, because to me this is very interesting. One of the people that would help with history is from this area, and his name was Norberto Martinez. And Norberto used to communicate with me a lot via mail. And this is a little photocopy of a particular letter he sent me. You can see it's a letter, okay? But the interesting thing is, he writes on the front of the envelope. And every American knows how you address an envelope. You don't write a letter on the front of an envelope. And yet he did. But now the interesting part about his little note is about history, because it says in his note that it pertains to the Keene Ranch, and most of us all know the Keene Ranch here in Texas. And we've seen it in the cowboy movies. The Mexican man, the landowner, rides up to that property and he says, hey, this is my land. And what happens? The other people go, no, it's not. And the people, he describes who they are. And they're related to us, so it's very interesting. There you are. I hope everybody enjoyed that. But my last part is going to be, what can you share that you know about history that you got communication on? Whatever gave you some little hint of, well, where you came from, where you used to live, how it was on that ranch. You know that because somebody either told you or you did see it somewhere in writing.
Well, that's why I always say that a lot of it, I wouldn't have been anywhere that I'm at if you guys wouldn't have done all the homework, a lot of the homework before I ever came around. I knew all the old cowboy stories and stuff, but it wasn't until they did all the genealogy that I found out all the rest of the history. I mean, we owned the land, for almost 200 years, but
Right.
the stories get old after 200 years. You don't hear the real story, and like I said, when I came along, all I heard was old drunken tales and this and that, so.
But that's a start.
Yeah, but they were always so sketchy, it's like,
Yeah.
trying to use it.
And if old so-and-so is talking about it, it's probably not worth.
Yeah, and then you wouldn't know, and they never had the dates and the names right, so.
But when Jesse would tell me some of those stories, he described the house, a Navarro house, and on his property now, you can go see the foundation that he told me about. So you see, that's where history is. It's coming and coming and growing, and it's a learning process, and that's why we need our young people to always,
Well,
you
yeah,
know,
I think
want
it's
to-
like the young kids and everything, I think it's getting more prominent now, but if they would put it like connecting the dots or little things like that to get them interested in it even when they're young, you know, like connect the dot from grandma to grandpa and what's it put in the big picture of you or something, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
You know, so,
Yeah.
you know, come up with something that to get them interested right from the start.
yeah. Most people haven't ever seen that book, have you? Or do you remember it?
Something
San
like
Antonio phone book? It was only this big, you know. It says 1986.
Oh, well, that was
And
about four.
it says
It's 1836 and 1986.
1986.
That was for the sesquicentennial.
Okay.
I had to learn a big, long word.
Sesquicentennial.
Subsequently.
Well, anyway, that was nice that Navarro was on there.
150 years. I started, I guess, late. I enjoyed the stories Daddy would tell about how they played cowboys and Indians on real horses riding around out here with friends. But when as I probably mentioned before, when I came out to have coffee with his mother and her brothers and sisters, it suddenly dawned on me, gee, Dad, I know who Mom's grandpas are, and I know one of yours, but who's the other one? Well, he didn't know. Well, that started me on this journey. And the other ladies that were there said, well, oh, that was old Lum and Mandy. Lum Columbus James and Jesse Columbus James married Amanda Crawford. Well, then I come to find out I'm related to all the Crawfords and the Rutledges south of here, and all of their in-laws and outlaws. And the Jameses married into the Kenny and McCoy families here. And then I chased them. Huh? Yeah. And chased the Jameses to East Texas and across to Mississippi to find out that's where they originally came from. But that I did some of that by letters, but a lot of it was getting the old phone books and getting from those counties and then looking for Jameses or looking for McCoys and calling every one of them.
Wow.
That's good. Yeah. And now you can't find a phone book.
Yeah,
They
they
don't
don't
make
even make phone books or anything.
They don't
Yeah.
make them anymore.
I remember everybody used to prop the tables and chairs up with them.
So,
But then, Herlinda, how did you get started on this?
well, through Mrs. V, Maria Olga Villanueva, she was one of my mother's cousins. And she gave, I don't do research or anything. She gives me all the documents. Everything is given to me. Pictures. I only have the immediate family's pictures. Like I just inherited my oldest sister's pictures, de Orio Herrera. I don't think anybody in the family's got that picture that I know of. So I feel blessed in that sense. This is it. And I inherited this about a year ago from my niece that took care of my sister. She had all these pictures and she just gave them to me. So, like I say, I feel blessed because of that.
Well, that's what
I'm kind of in Herlinda's shoes. A lot of all of the McCoy stuff was already done. Peggy had done a lot of it. And then on my mom's side, the Ludwig side, that had already been done by some cousins and way back over to Germany and so on and so forth. And so a lot of that was already done. But no offense, but I ended up on, like my dad was fourth from, out of the 9 kids, youngest. But Aunt Clara, your grandma,
She was older.
she was older, yeah. So I tended to be like 20 years behind all the good stories. I mean, I still heard stories from my dad and some from my grandpa, but he was already so old that I didn't get a lot of the stories I would have liked to have had. And, you know, but and then on my mom's side, my grandpa died long before I was even born, and my grandma. Some stories, but not extensive, you know. We've got pictures, we know who they are, and there's one picture on my mom's side that we have it hanging in the house, but you know, it's one of those pictures because things were so hard back then, and they lived a really rough life, and it's like, you don't want to meet these people. Forget the dark, you don't want to see them in the daytime because they look so mean and ornery, but that was their life back then, you know. But,
That's what they did. They were mean to survive.
they had to be. Yeah, they had to be, yeah.
This is what I wanted out of this, was to get other people to talk about how any kind of communication has impacted you. And we learn from hearing it, from somebody writing to us, or it's in books, and the best is real life stories.
I like to tell the stories that are told to me because of what I've lived, you know. I start there. But stories that have been told to me about the past, I like to tell the stories.
It's wonderful.
People that are gone. So,
It's wonderful.
Well, I always thought the stories they would tell us were always so different and almost conflicting. And for us, being up from the snow near Detroit, we'd come to Texas, and then I would hear half of my relatives speaking Spanish and looking Latino, and the other half being 6'2" and blue eyes and blonde hair and Germans, and then they would be speaking German. So I was always interested in whether we were half Nazis hiding out here in the desert from Hitler or something. Because I grew up in that era, you know, at the time, that I thought, well, gosh, this family is really scrambled because they'll speak English when they want to try to correct you, and then they'll speak Spanish when they're trying to do something else, and then if they don't really want you to know, they'll speak German. So, you know, it was like the German was like, okay, you're out of the loop for sure. So, you know, so that gave me a lot of weird things. But it was really hard because my father died so young, and then my mother and him were getting a divorce, and like I said, I had really just the old stories, and no nothing until I came down here.
We're talking about the Tobin family. Now, Jose Antonio Navarro had 7 children, 2 of them had already passed. Anyway, they were girls and they had already passed. He only had left 1 girl and 4 boys. She married the Tobin. And that's where all this stuff, that's where the Tobins come from.
And Josephine Street, downtown San Antonio, was named after their grandmother, Josephine Tobin.
oh, really?
Out there by Woodlawn Lake.
And right where,
I know just,
right there in Alamo Heights, right near the Sunoco gas station where you go up Austin Highway and all that, that was all the old dairy farm of the Tobins. That's where they actually had their dairy farm. Up where the McNay Museum is and all that is where they had their Tobin dairy farm for many years. That was all Tobin land there. He came up to the ranch and all that stuff when he was like 90-some years old. Came up there and I drove him all around, took him out back. They felt real tied to that area because this is where their great-grandfather was murdered as a tax collector for Atascosa County when it was the Ampian place. So they had a real connection to my property because they knew that their great-grandfather had been the tax collector and had been all along those properties up and down the streets. I had a lot of relatives that came all the way from Shreveport, Louisiana, that were other distant Tobins that just wanted to come to see the area.
We have to begin with genealogy. That is tracing our families back, beginning with mom, dad, grandparents, even aunts, uncles, and cousins. That is all sorts of in-laws and even an outlaw or two. But what an adventure. A good genealogist, family historian, begins this journey collecting stories they've heard from mom, dad, grandparents, even Uncle Waldo, and especially Aunt Anna. Every story does count, even for smiles. Write them down, type them up, save them on computers, flash drives, even print it out in binders. Just as important, collect and put names and dates to the photos, postcards, and letters you have. It's all history.